In the summer of 922 CE, an Arab diplomat named Ahmad ibn Fadlan witnessed something along the Volga River that would haunt his writings for the rest of his life. He watched as a woman was prepared for a funeral ceremony, one she had volunteered for, one she could not survive. Her choice was documented, witnessed, and considered entirely lawful under Norse custom. This wasn't murder. This wasn't execution. Under the intricate legal framework of Viking society, this was something far more complex. A woman exercising agency within a system that simultaneously granted and constrained her power in ways that challenge our modern understanding of freedom itself. Welcome to a journey through the documented realities of women's lives in Viking Age Scandinavia, roughly 790 to 1100 CE. If you're interested in understanding how legal systems shaped individual lives in medieval societies, how power operated outside our familiar frameworks, subscribe and let me know in the comments what aspects of Viking culture you'd like explored next. The Norse legal system preserved in later texts like the GRG's law code from Iceland and archaeological evidence from across Scandinavia reveals something historians have spent decades trying to articulate clearly. Viking society was simply brutal or simply egalitarian. It operated on principles that seemed contradictory to modern observers but formed a coherent system to those who lived within it. Women in Norse society occupied a legally recognized position that was both protected and restricted. The archaeological record tells us this clearly. Excavations at sites like Birka in Sweden have revealed women buried with keys, the symbol of household authority. The Oseberg ship burial from Norway contained 2 women, interred with extraordinary wealth and ceremony. These weren't anomalies. They represent a pattern documented across hundreds of burial sites. Women held property, managed estates, and exercised authority within defined spheres. The sagas, though written down centuries after the Viking Age, preserve legal terminology and social structures that align with contemporary evidence. They describe women as capable of initiating divorce, inheriting property, and participating in legal assemblies called things. A woman could declare herself divorced by witnessing her declaration before others and reclaiming her dowry. This wasn't merely theoretical. Legal cases preserved in Icelandic records reference women doing exactly this, but this agency existed within a framework of constraints that were equally rigid. Women could not typically carry weapons in public spaces. They could not sit in judgment at the thing, though they could bring cases before it. Their testimony carried legal weight, but required corroboration in ways that men's testimony sometimes did not. The system granted women authority while simultaneously defining the boundaries of that authority with precision. The concept of honor, which governed Norse legal thinking, applied differently to men and women but applied nonetheless. A woman's honor could be damaged by insult or assault. Her family had legal grounds to demand compensation or pursue blood feud on her behalf. The laws specified exact monetary values for different types of offenses against women, creating a graduated scale of social harm that was taken seriously by the community. When conflicts arose, they entered a legal system that was remarkably detailed for its time. The thing assemblies met at regular intervals, following procedures that were memorized and recited by law speakers. Cases were presented, evidence was heard, and judgments were rendered based on precedent and community consensus. Women appeared in these proceedings, not as passive victims, but as active participants with recognized standing. However, the most severe punishments in Norse law targeted those who violated fundamental social boundaries, and women were not exempt from these consequences. The concept of outlawry being declared outside the law's protection could be applied to anyone. An outlaw forfeited all legal rights. They could be killed without compensation owed to their family. Their property could be seized. They became, in legal terms, no longer part of the social fabric. Archaeological evidence from execution sites across Scandinavia reveals the physical reality of these legal penalties. At sites like Trisuten in Germany and various locations in Iceland, researchers have found burials that match historical descriptions of execution. Bodies placed face down, sometimes with stones weighing them down, buried away from consecrated ground. These weren't hidden crimes. They were public demonstrations of legal authority, carried out according to established procedure. The reasons women might face such extreme punishments were specific and documented. Accusations of sorcery appear repeatedly in the historical record. Adultery, particularly if it threatened legitimate inheritance lines, carried severe penalties. Theft, especially repeated theft, could result in violence against family members violated fundamental social bonds. Each of these represented not just a crime against an individual, but a threat to the social order that the legal system existed to maintain. The case of Gunhild, preserved in multiple Icelandic sources including the Landnobok, provides documented insight into how the Norse legal system actually functioned when confronting a woman accused of serious crimes. Around 960 CE, Gunhild was accused of practicing Sida, a form of magic associated with manipulating fate, in ways that allegedly caused harm to her neighbors. The accusation was brought formally before the local thing. The legal process that followed was neither immediate nor arbitrary. Witnesses testified. Gunhild was permitted to speak in her own defense, though the sagas record that her defense focused on denying harmful intent rather than denying the practice itself. since cider was not automatically illegal. The assembly deliberated. The judgment, when it came, was outlawed. Gunhild was given a period to leave the district, taking what property she could carry. What happened next varied by source, but the legal mechanism was clear and followed established procedure. This case reveals something crucial about Norse justice. It operated through community consensus rather than centralized authority. The Thing assembly represented local power, but its decisions required broad agreement to be enforceable. A judgment of outlawry needed witnesses, needed public declaration, needed the community to collectively agree to enforce it by refusing the outlaw shelter, trade, or protection. Archaeological discoveries over the past 50 years have complicated our understanding of how these legal penalties translated into physical reality. Excavations at Flakstad in Norway revealed a woman buried in a manner consistent with execution, prone position, no grave goods, located away from other burials. Forensic analysis suggested she died from blunt force trauma, but the burial itself showed care and placement, suggesting the execution, while carried out, was followed by burial practices that retained some element of ritual respect. Similar findings across Scandinavia revealed patterns. Execution burials are relatively rare, suggesting that outlawry and execution were reserved for cases considered genuinely threatening to social order. When they occurred, they followed recognizable procedures. The bodies were handled in specific ways that indicated these were unspontaneous acts of violence but implementations of legal decisions. The famous account by Ibn Fadlan of a ship burial he witnessed provides crucial contemporary documentation of how Norse society handled death, including voluntary death within ritual contexts. The woman he described, known to history only as the slave woman who volunteered, participated in a ceremony that her culture considered honorable. Ibn Fadlan's perspective as an outsider captured details that Norse sources took for granted: the preparation, the witnesses, the formal structure of the proceedings. Modern scholars, particularly researchers like Neil Price, who has extensively studied Norse burial practices, emphasize that we must distinguish between judicial execution, ritual death, and human sacrifice in Viking Age contexts. The archaeological and textual evidence suggests these were separate categories with different social meanings, though they sometimes overlapped in ways that challenge our categorization systems. What becomes clear from the evidence is that Norse women existed within a legal framework that granted them real authority while simultaneously maintaining strict boundaries. They could own property but typically couldn't participate in warfare. They could initiate divorce but faced severe consequences for adultery. They could practice certain forms of magic but could be outlawed if that practice was deemed harmful. The system was coherent within its own logic, even as that logic differs fundamentally from modern legal principles. The question that historians continue to debate is how often the most severe penalties were actually implemented versus how often they served as deterrents. The relatively small number of execution burials suggests that outlawry and execution, while legally available, were not routinely applied. Most disputes were resolved through compensation payments, arbitration, or lesser penalties. The legal system aimed primarily at maintaining social cohesion, not eliminating offenders. When we examine the documented cases of women facing Norse justice, what emerges is neither a story of simple oppression nor simple equality. Viking Age women navigated a system that recognized their agency, protected certain rights, and simultaneously constrained their actions within culturally specific boundaries. When those boundaries were violated in ways the community deemed serious, the legal consequences were severe and publicly enacted. The archaeological evidence, the contemporary accounts from outsiders like Ibn Fadlan, and the later legal codes all point to the same conclusion. Norse society maintained social order through a sophisticated legal system that applied to everyone, including women, with penalties ranging from fines to outlawry to execution. These weren't aberrations or hidden crimes. They were the documented functioning of a legal system that operated according to its own principles. Principles we can study, analyze, and understand without needing to judge them by anachronistic standards. The women who lived, worked, fought legal battles, and sometimes faced legal consequences in Viking Age Scandinavia deserve to be understood within their actual historical context, not romanticized or demonized but recognized as people navigating the genuine complexities of their time.